It started with something almost laughably simple: a man sitting in front of a camera. His name was Allen Egon Cholakian, and online he presented himself as an accomplished researcher warning humanity about disasters, climate change, mysterious forces, and the possible collapse of civilization. His channel contained more than 100 videos, many of them stretching for hours. But viewers quickly noticed something strange. Egon barely moved. In some recordings, he appeared capable of sitting almost completely still for hours while delivering increasingly dramatic warnings. At first, it looked like nothing more than another bizarre corner of the internet, but the longer people looked, the stranger the story became. His online biography was equally unusual. Profiles attributed to Egon described an extraordinary academic career involving prestigious institutions and impressive connections, yet independent searches appeared to reveal surprisingly little conventional research associated with him. Photographs showed him alongside prominent figures, but some images appeared suspicious or manipulated. His claims about science seemed difficult to verify, and his warnings relied heavily on urgency and catastrophic predictions. What began as curiosity slowly became a question. Was Egon simply an eccentric internet personality, or was his carefully constructed online identity part of something much larger? Then came the first crack in the mystery. A closer examination of Egon's digital footprint suggested that his story did not exist in isolation. His videos repeatedly referenced an organization called the Creative Society, a movement presenting itself as an international project dedicated to solving humanity's biggest problems. Its message sounded almost impossible to reject: peace, free healthcare, financial security, an end to war, and a transformed society where people around the world could supposedly live without many of the burdens they faced every day. Behind the optimistic language, however, were extraordinary claims about climate disasters, cosmic forces, and the future of civilization. The movement had a massive online presence. Videos appeared across social media, often using professional-looking presentations and apparently authoritative speakers. To someone casually scrolling through a feed, it could easily look legitimate. The organization claimed volunteers existed across more than 180 countries, creating the impression of a huge global movement. But critics and investigators began questioning how much of this image was genuine. A BBC investigation cited in the transcript reported that scientists had been invited to participate in events and that their comments were allegedly edited or presented in ways that distorted their actual positions on climate change. Suddenly, the strange YouTube channel was beginning to look like only one piece of a much larger network. The trail eventually led to a name that appeared again and again: Igor Mikhailovich. According to the transcript, Danilov had once worked as a chiropractor, but later became associated with the leadership of Creative Society and the Ukrainian spiritual movement. The connection changed the investigation completely. What appeared on the surface to be climate activism now seemed connected to a much older spiritual organization, surrounded by controversial beliefs and conspiracy theories. Investigators found references linking the different groups together, creating the impression of a network rather than several unrelated projects. AllatRa's public image was considerably stranger than Creative Society's. Its online material included claims involving telepathy, supernatural abilities, extraterrestrial life, and experiments intended to demonstrate supposed mental powers. Its early history was reportedly connected to spiritual books attributed to author Anastasia Novik, featuring a supernatural figure named Rigdan Jakub. The transcript notes that this fictional character was described as a martial arts teacher and was repeatedly associated with details resembling Danilov's own biography. For investigators, this raised a disturbing possibility. Perhaps the online movement was not merely spreading questionable science, but building a belief system around a real-world leader. As investigators dug deeper, far more serious allegations began to surface. A former member interviewed by journalist Elena Namleva made claims about coercive sexual practices within Danilov's circle, alleging that women were pressured into participating and threatened with spiritual consequences if they refused or spoke publicly. These are allegations from a former member, not facts independently established by the transcript, but they changed the tone of the investigation. The story was no longer simply about strange beliefs or questionable scientific claims. It was now about the possibility of psychological control being used against people who had placed their trust in the movement. Around the same period, authorities began paying greater attention to AllatRa. The transcript states that in 2023, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church described the organization as a cult, while Russia also declared its activities undesirable. Ukrainian authorities reportedly conducted raids across the country, targeting numerous locations connected to members of the organization. According to the transcript, investigators recovered religious material and weapons from at least one location, while Danilov himself was not found. The unanswered question became increasingly difficult to ignore. If this organization was truly as harmless as its public-facing websites suggested, why was so much effort being spent investigating it? But the most revealing part of the investigation was not hidden inside a secret building. It was happening in plain sight. Across the internet, the network appeared to operate through hundreds of channels and countless social media accounts, repeatedly promoting the same ideas, the same organizations, and the same personalities. According to the transcript, figures in American political and religious circles had also publicly associated themselves with Creative Society or AllatRa-related messaging. Whether every connection represented genuine support, deliberate association, or something more complicated remained difficult to establish. But the sheer scale of the digital campaign was impossible to ignore. The strategy seemed remarkably simple: create credibility through repetition. One account would publish a claim, another would repeat it, another would produce a video. And eventually the same narrative could appear to be everywhere. Photographs with public figures added another layer of apparent legitimacy. A viewer encountering the message for the first time might assume that so many appearances and endorsements could not possibly be meaningless. But the investigation suggested that this was precisely the power of the network, not necessarily convincing everyone, but surrounding people with the same story until questioning it became difficult. Then another name entered the story: Jakub Jahl, a Czech journalist and investigator who had been working to expose online. However, a completely different version of Jakub began appearing. Videos accused him of horrific crimes in Tanzania and portrayed him as someone who had secretly harmed children while pretending to help them. The allegations spread across YouTube and TikTok through apparently serious-looking documentaries and emotional interviews. To someone discovering only those videos, the conclusion seemed obvious, but there was a problem. According to the investigation in the transcript, the entire story had been fabricated. The reason became clearer when investigators traced the origin of the campaign. Jakub had reportedly been involved in exposing AllatRa and helping locate one of Danilov's hideouts. Afterward, a coordinated wave of accusations allegedly transformed him from investigator into villain. The claims became so widespread that even government authorities reportedly investigated him, and it took years before he was cleared. The damage, however, could not simply be erased. Thousands of people had already encountered the accusations, and many would never see the evidence that disproved them. For Jakub, the consequences were deeply personal. In an interview included in the transcript, he described how the campaign had affected his ability to return to Tanzania and maintain contact with children and communities he had previously helped. His greatest pain was not the accusations against himself. It was the belief that the children he cared about could become targets of the same organization he had spent years investigating. He described feeling powerless as the conflict moved beyond the internet and into the lives of people who had nothing to do with the original dispute. That moment reveals something important about modern misinformation. A fabricated story does not need to be believed by everyone to cause damage. It only needs to spread far enough. A journalist can be investigated, a reputation can collapse, friendships can disappear, and innocent people can become afraid all before the truth catches up. And while Jakub eventually received vindication, the digital version of his story continued circulating. The internet had already created a permanent shadow around his name. By this point, the investigation had traveled a remarkable distance from the strange man who refused to move his hands on camera. Egon Cholakian appeared less like the center of the mystery and more like one component in a much larger ecosystem. Behind him was Creative Society. Behind Creative Society were connections to AllatRa. Around that network were social media accounts, videos, conferences, public personalities, accusations, counter-accusations, and an endless stream of information designed to keep the story moving. And perhaps that was the most unsettling discovery of all. The power of the network did not depend on every claim being true. It depended on attention. Fear attracted attention. Controversy attracted attention. Conspiracy attracted attention. Even attempts to debunk the organization generated more content about it. Every new accusation created another video, another comment, another post, another search. The machine continued moving because the internet itself had become part of the distribution system. The transcript ultimately presents AllatRa as an organization surrounded by allegations of manipulation, pseudoscience, coordinated propaganda, and attempts to influence public perception. It also describes claims that women within the group were placed into controlled roles and subjected to intense psychological pressure. These accounts are extremely serious and should not be treated as independently proven, simply because they appear in online videos or interviews, but they are important because they illustrate the central danger investigators were confronting when a movement creates an environment where its leader's authority becomes unquestionable. Separating genuine belief from manipulation can become extraordinarily difficult. What makes this story different from a conventional crime case is the absence of a single obvious crime scene. There is no one room where the entire mystery happened. The evidence is scattered across websites, videos, photographs, interviews, social media accounts, investigations, and competing narratives. Every piece has to be examined carefully because the same internet that can expose wrongdoing can also manufacture it. That is what makes this case so difficult and so disturbing. In the end, the story begins with a motionless man on YouTube but finishes somewhere much larger, with the realization that online reality can be constructed piece by piece until it becomes almost impossible to distinguish from truth. Egon's unusual videos led investigators toward creative society. Creative society led toward AllatRa led toward allegations of manipulation, propaganda, political influence, and attacks against critics. And the campaign against Jakub Jahl demonstrated how quickly a person's identity could be rewritten for an online audience. The deeper investigators went, the less this looked like one strange internet personality, and the more it looked like a lesson in how influence can operate in the digital age. Perhaps that is the real warning buried inside this rabbit hole. The most dangerous stories are not always the ones that look obviously unbelievable. Sometimes they arrive wrapped in scientific language, professional photographs, confident speakers, impressive credentials, and thousands of people repeating the same message. They ask us to trust before we verify, and once that trust is established, reality can become whatever the network tells us it is. For International Crimes Zone, this case is a reminder that the first question should never be, how convincing is this? It should be, what can actually be proven? Because on the internet, sometimes the mystery is not discovering what happened. It is discovering which parts of the story were ever real in the first place.